The Flash movie. Been stuck in development hell since I was in high school, and we're finally at a point where it's actually coming out. Saying I'm completely uninterested would be an understatement. I feel genuine boredom every time this movie comes up in conversation or I see new clips and trailers. The point I've reached with this is the same as where I'm at with Star Wars. Why does it even matter anymore? We're all patiently waiting for James Gunn to reveal more about his new DCU, and this movie just feels like it's in the way of that. This trailer doesn't change my mind at all, and let's get into why. To quickly summarize what's going on here, we start with Keaton's Batman explaining loss and pain to Barry. Can't help but feel like this would have been a much more poignant scene coming from the DCEU's actual Batman, who was basically Barry's Tony Stark. But yeah, let's bring back a 71-year-old Michael Keaton so we can milk those sweet, sweet member berries. Anyway, the scene shifts to Barry's childhood, and we get introduced to the concept the movie's based on Flashpoint. Barry goes back in time to save his mom, and when he gets back to the present, everything has gone horribly wrong. After that, it's just a slew of copy pasted superhero action scenes. And I mean that literally because it's just Man of Steel with Supergirl instead of Superman. First things first, how is it that these scenes somehow look better in a 10-year-old movie? Maybe it's just me, but somehow this movie looks cheap. And that's the last thing I thought I'd say about this movie after all the time it took to make. The budget was reportedly $220 million, and you couldn't tell by how it looks. Bad VFX is nothing new, so maybe that's something you can overlook these days. What can't be overlooked is the fact that they had Flashpoint as their basis, and somehow managed to butcher it anyways. Instead of Jeffrey Dean Morgan as a savage Thomas Wayne Batman and a war between Aquaman and Wonder Woman, we get Old Man Keaton and a Supergirl who steals Superman's Flashpoint arc verbatim, as if Henry Cavill wasn't sitting right there begging to be used as Superman again. Giving the fans what they want would be admitting defeat in these people's minds. They'd much rather stuff the movie full of nostalgia bait and hope that's enough to distract you from the turd they're about to pump out. As if all that wasn't bad enough, I have a really bad feeling Supergirl is going to handle Zod with a lot more ease than Superman did. After all, Superman had to resort to killing Zod. Something tells me it might not be that hard for Supergirl, though. Which is strange considering she's been presumably locked up her whole life and should look a lot worse than she does in these scenes. Flashpoint Superman looked like he was on the verge of death, but she looks like she missed out on her morning coffee. Modern movies have made me cynical, so I truly hope I'm wrong here and they surprise me by having Zod wipe the floor with this ragtag team like they're nothing. Speaking of nothing, did you happen to catch a glimpse of Ben Affleck's cameo? And when I say cameo, I mean cameo. By this point, it's pretty clear he's got the one chase scene they keep showing off and his heart to heart with Barry that obviously doesn't work. I remember a while back hearing from the director that Ben Affleck's Batman was a substantial part of the emotional impact of the movie, which at this point was obviously just bait for Snyder fans. I'd be surprised if he's even in the ending. An ending, by the way, that hits like a ton of bricks in the actual Flashpoint story. But who needs him when you have the rumored George Clooney cameo instead? Because everyone loved his Batman. Obviously, that's what the audience is craving. In 20 years, it's going to be mind blowing to look back and see how Cavill and Affleck were treated. And these people have nobody to blame but themselves for wasting two actors with such immense amounts of potential, talent, and love for their characters. Although that last one probably doesn't apply to Affleck anymore. I'm sure by now I've already been labeled as toxic for even having any non positive opinions, but for anyone still using that ability to think logically, here's the few positive takeaways I do have looking at this trailer. The Flash suit does look great, and with a few tweaks, it could be perfect. The CGI might not be great, but the aesthetic of the movie looks to match with the story. With the way Marvel's been tricking us with dark trailers from movies like Quantum Mania, you never know these days, but based off this trailer, they certainly have no issue being a darker movie in a market that's all sunshine and rainbows, and that's something I can at least respect. All that being said, none of that is enough to make me care about this movie. At the end of the day, there isn't a point to care. James Gunn is playing his cards close to the chest in an effort to not tank these remaining releases, but most people see how pointless anything is if it's not directly a part of Gunn's new DCU. All the nostalgia bait in the world isn't enough to save this movie for me, and at best it'll be a dumb popcorn flick, and at worst it'll be an absolute train wreck. I won't even get into Ezra Miller, because that's a can of worms I'm not opening up, but suffice to say, knowing Ezra actually committed crimes and is still receiving heaps of praise makes me feel like I'm living in the Matrix. To make matters worse, we not only have to deal with one Ezra, but two, because clearly he wasn't annoying enough before. We need two of them to really annoy people. The whole concept is pretty dumb, and just makes it more evident that they strayed from the original Flashpoint story solely for the purpose of straying, and not because they had a way to actually improve upon the story. If you really want to know more about this movie, go ahead and take a look at the leaks from CinemaCon, which I won't get into because they're pretty spoiler heavy, but suffice to say, this seems like a pretty average superhero movie at best. Nothing in the trailer even looks groundbreaking or new to the genre, so I can't imagine the movie would be either. Flashpoint is supposed to be the start of a new era, but in reality, it's the end of one. Gunn can pretend like he likes the movie, but what else is he supposed to say? The studio spent unbelievable amounts of money on this movie. They need it to succeed, and his stamp of approval still means something to certain people. DC is basically using this as an excuse to justify torching the entire timeline and restarting with Gunn's new plan. But in reality, it's doubtful any non Gunn related character comes back. Expect this to be the last time you see Ezra, Ben Affleck, Sasha Calle on screen, as well as any other cameos you might see in this movie. Something to keep in mind too, this movie came at a time at DC where no one had a real plan for what was going on. Walter Hamada had little pieces in motion, but nothing that was going to come to fruition in the way that James Gunn does. Walter Hamada wasn't even focusing on Batman, Flash, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Green Lantern, the real Justice League characters. He was focusing more on Supergirl, Batgirl, etc. So, in my mind, that tells me a lot about this movie and where it started off, and it probably didn't stray too far from that, even under David Zaslav and James Gunn in what changes they might have made. I'm not going to speculate on box office earnings because the general audience's interest is tough to gauge at this point, but with a budget of 220 million, they need at least 550 million to break even. And that seems unlikely at this point given other recent superhero movies. Could be wrong on that, but I will say I do think this movie opens strong. The rest is up to that second weekend drop off because that's where these superhero movies tend to lose their money. The bottom line is, at this point, you're either excited about The Flash or you don't care at all. And I doubt any new trailers or clips are going to change people's minds going forward. The best we can hope for is The Flash is a decent popcorn flick that doesn't absolutely dump on the characters we love. I'm going into this movie the same way I go into leg day at the gym. Hoping I can get out as soon as possible and not feel like complete crap the next day.